We are behind the blue screen. Okay. And everything should be about good to go. I am transitioning us to live. All right. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And I am
Oh,
your Nick.
yeah, I was supposed to introduce Nick. Oh God, I completely forgot. I was trying to bring up the cat. We have a special guest on today's podcast who is my very good friend,
And my friend too.
and and also Mango's acquaintance. They've known each other just a little bit. Nick, hey Nick, how you doing? Welcome to the cast, bud.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, Nick was the third. He's been on the cast before. He was the third GM for our Star Wars game, which is what we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
Well, it's pretty simple. On this podcast, we like to talk about games. And one of the things that we did for quarantine is we started up a Star Wars tabletop game on Roll20. We were playing the Fantasy Flight, Edge of the Empire rules, which use their own special die and everything like this. It's not a Roll20 system at all. And we played for about this whole year until we all just kind of, it seems, I almost want to say that it petered out, but it didn't really. We just kind of got to a natural endpoint, and it seems as though we're all comfortable ending the game, I guess. So we're gonna talk a little bit about it. Where do you want to start? What's like the most pressing thing on your mind when it comes to Star Wars?
I think maybe we should start with like a kind of like a survey of the systems, what we thought worked, what we thought didn't work. Also, we'll get into this a little bit later, but I'm interested to see, since Nick did pre-generated paths and we did our own custom stuff. So I'm interested to see
true.
Actually, why don't we start there? Nick, what did you think of the quality of the pre-generated paths since you ran pre-run adventures?
So I thought the adventures that they had published were pretty well written and were able to actually give a fair number of different paths through everything, where it had written for a number of different contingencies or different options to throw at the players, which I thought was really nice. Half the time when I'm running a Pathfinder pre-published adventure, things tend to get pretty railroaded. So it's all right, guys, get to the trade. We're going to the next combat encounter. Here's some skill checks in between. But this actually had a fair amount of um, options, which I thought was nice. At the same time, I wasn't necessarily the best at always bringing all of those in, but it also kind of fits when this is fundamentally a very narrative roles driven game.
That's
Yeah.
true. Just out of curiosity, the ones you ran for us, were like most of the things we did accounted for, or did you have to do a lot of advising on the fly?
Um, there was definitely a little bit of improvising on the fly, but there were a fair number of things that you all did that were actually accounted for. Um, at the same time, figuring out what the right breadcrumbs to give you all was always a little bit of a challenge. One thing I saw with our party was that sometimes we would hit um, decision a decision freeze where it's like, oh, we have all these different options. Which one do we take? Then we debate it for like an hour.
Yeah,
That was true for every single one of us, no matter who was running. It seemed like there was always an hour of just deliberation until somebody sort of like took the reins and was like, "Okay, we're doing this," and like moved forward.
So and I definitely think that that's like maybe, I don't know if I want to call it exactly a weakness, because it was definitely part of the thing that like I really enjoyed about the system in general, was that like it felt kind of like it delivered on the promise of you could kind of do whatever you want, right? Which is like a thing that's like supposed to be true about TTRPGs in general, but like with something like Pathfinder or D&D, well, you're not necessarily like running sometimes you're running down the path, as Nick points out, with some of the pre-gen stuff, but like it still feels a bit more constrained, right? Especially when you've been playing for a while. Like, this is why I like playing with new people sometimes, is like they're generally unconstrained by kind of like the like what you can do in the system thoughts, and just kind of like, oh, well, like I want to do this, and you're like, yes, you can do that. We'll figure out how to make the dice work for that. Where that kind of jaded players kind of don't have as much of that. But I felt like,
and that's something that I always treasure in these kinds of games, right? Like I like to do crazy wacky plans right? And like 7C is really good about this. This is one of the things I really enjoy about playing 7C, like when we go to Gen Con or whatever, right? Which sort of gives you this freedom to, if you want to, opt into off the wall, out of the box ideas to like kind of make things happen. But I do think, I almost sort of think I guess I almost sort of think the that aspect of the plans are baked in. You know, like you kind of have to assume that there's going to be a certain amount of like indecisive deliberativeness to everything if you want the payoff of players get like the satisfaction of making and executing their own plans.
That's definitely, yeah, I think I agree with that. Um,
That that or it could just be that the party hasn't gotten used to deliberating quickly enough
Yeah,
that
that's fair.
with more practice at it, we'll be able to make decisions faster as a group.
and we've been doing this for a year and it keeps happening. So
Yeah, I also
maybe
think that it was a very open-ended sense of like the game. Like we were always in like big giant locations with
mm,
lots of travel between them. There was never any sort of deliberation about like how do we approach the next room in a dungeon, which might be like the sort of deliberation you would see in Pathfinder, right?
yep,
Or Dungeons and Dragons, right? Because we didn't really have any of those sorts of just like inside of a very fixed location, except for maybe the very first session, which was
yeah,
that, right? Basically everything else was like you're in a big ass city and you get to move kind of narratively like scene to scene and traverse, you know, miles at a time without any issue at all.
yeah, no,
A- And I think for combat, having the positions be in range bands kind of supports that non-grid based, non-map based approach, where it's basically, oh, your short distance, oh, your medium distance, long or extreme distance, definitely feeds into just the mind's eye of the map as opposed to actually putting things on grid. It's like, okay, exactly how many feet away am I from this person in order to determine whether I'm within range of this spell because I'm at this level.
Yeah. Though I think in general, I mean, something that they say in the system for combat is that combat always has to sort of be a chase in like the party is getting chased or the party is chasing someone, right? Like it has to be driven by more than just wipe out the enemy team. And that ended up bearing fruit, in my opinion. The more combat was just we're trying to kill as many of these guys as we can, the less interesting it was. And the more that it was sort of driven by other concerns, right? Like we're trying to escape the whatever before the timer runs out, right? Like that it creates a sense of like urgency um that I wasn't super used to, but I think the system is properly designed for.
yeah. Also, it gives the people who aren't great at combat something to do, right? Like,
Yeah.
funnily enough, it was the three of our characters that were like the combat experts, right? Like, it was like, whoever was running the game was was either the Omega and Argus show or like the Argus and Jad show whenever like pure combat came around, and everybody else was kind of like, "Ha, I waved my blaster at things," and then you know,
Which I also think is kind of funny in a way because I like one of the things that's interesting about this as like a narrative based game is that it actually does still scratch the itch that I have for crunch just because of the complication of the talent tree and how that affected my like decision making when it came to like experience and that kind of stuff, right? Like I still sort of got the same feeling of like, oh, my numbers are going up because I'm investing talents and skills, or I'm getting these talents that are procking or whatever else, right? Even if the game is mostly driven by a very narrative engine rather than a crunchy one.
yeah,
Yeah, I think my build kind of solved combat by the end, where it was even if I don't necessarily have perfect dice, I have as many green dice as I possibly can, because my agility's through the roof. I have a gun that's full auto with the tinker so that it full autos on every single advantage. And I'm in Mandalorian armor and I've got all these perks that improve my soak such that I can't actually get hurt by most handheld weaponry.
yeah. I think that I think there's a little bit of stuff there, like, a little bit of kind of fine tuning there, right? Like if we kept playing for much longer, I feel like maybe that tinker on the automatic weapon needed to be tuned down or something like that. But I also don't think it was like super important, right? Because like even though you were, like you said, you basically solved combat, it didn't like make everybody else irrelevant, because most of the game wasn't revolving around that. It was revolving around like other things, right? Like other kind of like set pieces. It was revolving around that, or like the other big example of this is like D4 had like hacking solved like 100%, right?
Yep.
Like you literally had like the only thing, like you threw Lobot against him, and like Lobot was like a minor challenge, right? And so that's it.
I mean, he had to take that check 2 or 3 times, but he had the talents to take it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think might, funnily enough, is like a good strength, right? Like of the system. His D4 felt like a hack master, and Jad, Argus, and Omega all felt like real good combatants or whatever, without being overbearing on the story, right? Like something like Pathfinder and D&D, it's like all about combat, and like combat's like, I don't know, like D&D calls it like one of the pillars, but it's kind of like the strongest pillar. It's like most of like the thing, if that makes sense. Where like especially from like a systemized perspective, right? Like the RP in the other systems, all or in D&D is always fun, but it's like not a thing that you can systemize. Or if you try and like do too close to the rules, you end up cutting out most people because of
I don't think people want that systemized.
Yeah.
Which is funny, but like it's sort of the truth, I guess. Like people don't want to have complexity in their diplomatic situations in the same sense that they want complexity in their combat situations. And God help us, we fucking tried, right?
Yeah.
Hell's Rebels was a 2.5 year experiment in this, which I would say worked in the sense that it got people who I otherwise would have expected not to get involved in the diplomacy stuff involved in the diplomacy stuff. But the diplomacy stuff that I created, we abandoned almost immediately.
Yeah, and I think the point is less that people don't want the complexity, is that they want the complexity to be like natural speechcraft, right? Rather than like trying to systemize it, because that's like tough to do, right? Like
Yeah. But anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about like the structure of because this was structured in a different way than a lot of our other campaigns have been, which were very like obviously very narrative focused, right? And part of the part of the buy-in for Hell's Rebels, or most any game we've played together, has always been sort of the essential railroading, right? In Hell's Rebels, it is the party wants to rebel against Bards of Lythrune and this oppressive like regime, and that's kind of like taken for granted. Whereas in Star Wars, it was much more open-ended than that, right? Like the whole point was to be fluid and allow players to sort of like discover their own paths forward and what they wanted to focus on and what they were interested in. How do you feel like that played out on like a top-down campaign-wide uh viewpoint?
So I definitely think that like the thing we did, the thing you pioneered essentially, which is like pick one of these 3 missions and we'll do it. Like gave enough structure there, because like one of those things where like you need a little bit of constraint in order for things to really bloom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like I felt like if we wanted to, we could have like pitched you a mission. It would have gone fine, but we never really hit that, right? Like, but having the options there, I think, was really key. I think again, once we got on planet, right, like that, like let things spin out a little bit more, right? Which in a lot of cases was the find a terminal for D4 to hack, and like figure out like some piece of information, and then we'll develop a real plan from there. But I think that like felt very true to our party, right? Like that felt like felt like a different party if people wouldn't have been doing that, wouldn't have been like figuring out how this planet's internet could like get us like the dive bar to go interview or figure out the information for a certain thing or whatnot. Did you have any particular thoughts on it?
I guess the thing that I'm interested in is I almost sort of feel like I wanted to run this more along the lines of we talked about like the exploration based game in a podcast a couple
Mm.
of days ago, and maybe that would have been a good way to handle it, where we almost could have created a better sort of like ecosystem for the different like factions. Maybe it's just because like I got too busy to continue GMing, and really like it was hard to hand off that portion, because like I do sort of like the idea of like people like players getting more ingratiated with one of the factions over the others, and sort of like going deep on their sort of storyline in a way that, even though I don't like this game that much, in a way that like almost Fallout 4 did, right, where they had the different factions and they each had their different storylines, you could kind of play through them in parallel in a way, if you could kind of keep them happy with whatever their whatever the reputation was in that game or in that experience. And I do think that that was cool, but like I guess we never quite like realized the potential. Though I will say I do think we did realize the potential of sort of the like spacefaring. There's another thing that we talked about, like why is it so common to have this idea of just like, oh, a group of people and all you got is a spaceship and you're just flying through the universe doing odd jobs. I feel like that really came across.
I do. Yeah, I agree. I think with the factions thing, I think we were starting to get there, right? Because like we liked the Black Suns, or the
Yeah,
um, and we hated the Huts, right?
yeah,
And it took. I think it took a little while for that to coalesce really solidly, because everybody, like, because we all had kind of like different, um, like, I had ties to the Ashen Legion, and Ark hated the Huts and had ties to, and Argus had ties to the Golden Legion, or the Golden Armada.
Armada.
Yeah. Um, because we all had like those different kind of obligations, which I think was a very strong point of the system. It stopped us from like kind of like as a part. Like I think to make that really sing, we would have wanted the entire party to have coalesced on a faction and been like, okay, we're working with these guys now. At
Yeah,
least
I
for
feel
like
like
the
the
large
Ashen
part.
Legion and Black Sun got a lot of action.
Yeah.
Um, Golden Armada got a little bit, I guess. And then the bad guys pretty much universally ended up being like Huts, the Double R Gang, which was, I love the Double R Gang. I had that idea for the longest time, and I was just like, God, what a cool idea. And I also like the idea that the Double R Gang missions are sort of the freest. It's just like, hey, here's a rival drug lab, go fuck it up. Like, like I think there was something cool about like those sorts of missions, and there probably is a world in which like a more murder hobo-y party does sort of truly align with the Double R Gang in a
Yeah.
way that
I think
we
if
didn't.
everyone was
But
combat oriented, we probably would have done some real missions for the Double R Gang. But
yeah,
because we had several people that were very much non-combatants, very much wanted to actually talk things out or find the peaceful route, it was, why are we going to go work for these obviously chaotic evil, if this was D&D, faction, where all they want is destroy, death, destruction, drugs, murder, mayhem. Um, the idea was pretty good, but they ended up basically being villains for the most part.
yeah. I also think that the Double R Gang was hampered because one of the things that was motivating for players was the systemic reward. So like the Golden Armada gave raw credits. The what were
Ashen
some of the other?
Legion
The
gave
Action
bonus
Legion gave raw
experience.
experience, right? And the Double R Gangs thing was ship upgrades, which at the time, we hadn't played the system, and I made that decision. And obviously made sense because these guys are, like
Space
space
Trucker.
bikers and mechanics or whatever else. But like, I didn't realize how little that would be on a priority list of like systems that players are really going to go for.
Yeah.
So I think part of that was also the types of characters that we made. While Ark was actually pretty decent with the ship, most of the party wasn't built around being on a ship. So
Hmm.
we had a couple options where it was things that would have had us do more ship combat, ship encounters, and we said, "Oh hell no, let's take the thing of the ground."
I think part of that too is like it's harder, like in terms of like player expression, right? Like unless you know you've got a specific fantasy about like being like a ship captain and like an officer on that ship, is kind of like you kind of like blend into like whatever on the ship, and so it's like less attractive to players, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I also just don't think. I think this is a big failure of the system. I don't think this system made ship combat compelling. And this is also I think this is true of every system we've seen with this, which is also Starfinder. Um, like there is a version of the game where ship combat is itself really fun and engaging, and therefore we get more into it, right? Like I think back to like Empty Epsilon, which we played at a Gen Con a couple of years ago, right? Which is um it's like 5 people in a LAN or whatever, and you are controlling a ship, but it's sort of like Star Trek, right? You have a pilot who steers the ship. You have a scientist who's doing scanning stuff and is responsible for telling you where the asteroids are going. You have an engineer who's diverting power from here and there, and each of those kind of included their own little mini games that was like fun and engaging to be a part of, right? um and so I loved Empty Epsilon. I had a ton of
Right.
fun playing Empty Epsilon, because it really nailed that like 5 people doing asymmetric jobs in a party to all like move forward towards a common goal, right? And I swear to God, there has to be a tabletop version of that, but I have yet to see it.
I think it needs to be a little bit more integrated with like the player characters, right? Like it has to be a thing that like it's designed for from the ground up. And I think Star Wars is actually kind of a bad fit for that. Because not every Star Wars character is a ship character, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
I think in a lot of ways you really need to have something be far more narratively driven, um, for that to really work, because you need all of these non-pilot, non-gunner roles to be a lot more compelling. Whereas in pretty much every setting that we've ever played, pretty much the only thing everyone else is doing is giving buffs to the stars, which is the pilot and the gunner. And if you're not either controlling the position on the map or actually dealing the damage, what are you really doing in any type of ship-based combat? And
yeah,
that's true here in Star Wars. That's true in Starfinder. That's true in Skull and Shackles for ship-based combat as well, unless you get into that boarding type action.
yeah,
Um,
at least that's like an option in Skull and Shackles, though, right? Is like you can. I think the big thing is like making meaningful choices, and it's really hard to make meaningful choices. Like even the pilot and the gunner aren't making choices that are super meaningful, but they are at least making choices. Um,
right. Whereas everyone else, it really isn't much of anything. So at that point, you tend to just avoid the space stuff or anything where everyone's acting as a single unit. What I think would be more compelling if you wanted to do it would be something, if you really wanted to get into space combat, is have the party be an X-Wing squadron where
yeah,
everyone's in their own ship.
yeah.
And once you put everyone in their own ship, then it gets to be a lot more fun and interesting.
Yeah, or like you have you have somebody in the Y wings, somebody in an X wing, somebody in an A wing, and now you have sort of strengths and weaknesses, right? Where it's like, okay, well the Y wing is the bomber and he can do the most damage, but he's like slow and vulnerable. So you need the A wing to be like, kind of dog fighting to make sure. Like I feel like that would absolutely work. I also think that there's a version of this that works, which uses, I guess I would say, like parallel systemizing. Like part of the problem in my view is that the game wants to be about like raw, like on the ground combat, right? But it puts raw on the ground combat alongside all of these other sorts of things and kind of treats them as equal. I have a certain number of skill points and I can invest them anywhere. And I have to look at piloting next to light guns or whatever. You know, that that kind of creates a situation where I always look at piloting and I go, no. Oh, why would I take this? I
yeah.
want guns. Because like I'm never gonna, like how often am I doing like space combat stuff? How often am I doing piloting stuff? And so maybe there's a version of things where you either like integrate it, like you say, piloting is a more comprehensive skill that like encompasses more than just itself, or like instead of making gunnery checks to use a turret, you're using your gun checks. So like even if I am like, so obviously I was using ranged light a lot of the time as Omega. Well, maybe the light turret also uses ranged light in the thing. So like my combat abilities are then going 1-to-1 with my, like my ship abilities, or another version of this where it's sort of decoupled from that system, and like as you are gaining some sort of, like as you're getting some sort of progression in these combat skills, you're also gaining progression in a parallel sense. Like maybe you have two pools of skill trees, if that makes sense, right? And you can put 5 in ranged light and then 5 in gunnery without having to worry about them being mutually exclusive.
So I think the system actually did a better job of this than you give it credit for, because this is really what Argus chased, which was, well, I could put all these skill points into each of these individual traits, or I could see that they're all tied to agility, and that 90% of the things that my character wants to do are agility. So
Yeah.
rather than invest in skill points, let's chase those dedications at the top of the talent trees and crank that agility up to max. Therefore, I have at least all of my green dice for the agility pool maxed out for 80-90% of what I want to do.
That's honestly very fair. I felt the opposite urge. I was like, it was so clear how powerful dedication was that I was like, you know what? Fuck you, dedication. I'm not taking you. I'm gonna take the other things to be cool and not, like I just feel like I might say that dedication was too strong. Uh, it's just so incredibly strong to take dedication, even for 25 points, even at the very top of the tree, even with a max of 6, even with you only could take it like once or whatever. Like, it's just so much value out of just one investment of points.
It definitely has a lot of value. However, it works a lot better when you force characters to be mad, when they can't just say everything I need is an agility, and
Hmm.
therefore I only care about putting dedication into my agility. When you start making people need to use a lot more skills, then they can't be that one trick pony. So I think in some regards, the issue is that agility was too good because it had too many skills associated to it.
Yeah, this is sort of
So
like the Dex is the best stat problem in old versions of D&D.
Yeah. So real quick before we keep going, buddy, you should reset your camera. Your camera feed is like 2 seconds behind your voice. Not that
Woof.
it's the end of the world. Um. But yeah. So I think I generally agree, right? That maybe agility's a little too strong. I also think that part of this is like to the ship part of it is like ships failures on the ship don't have interesting consequences, right? Like it's all kind of very like the least interesting thing to do with an advantage or a threat is to like take a number with it, right? Like to just do a die or whatever, right? The more interesting things are to use them to do interesting environmental storytelling. And I think there's much less that you can do with that in like a dogfight, um, if that makes sense. Oh,
yeah, I think I see what you're saying.
did we lose Buddy? You
I'm
guy?
trying to. I'm still here. I'm just trying to figure out my camera
Okay.
because this is like being a pain.
Okay. But yeah, no, I honestly think that like I think maybe like start like ship combat's just like a hard thing to like do, right? Because I'm thinking about like Star Trek and I'm thinking about Star Wars, right? Like the movies and like the shows. Like in Star Wars during the big fight scenes, Princess Leia in like A New Hope, Princess Leia and C-3PO aren't really doing anything, and that's fine because they're not players that need to be doing something to be having fun, right? Or in Star Trek, right? Like the captain and the gunner are doing things, but like like the ship's council, right? Like the other kind of characters aren't necessarily doing stuff on the bridge during combat. Um, like Quark isn't when there's like military stuff happening. Quark is not like busy tending bar. Like we're not cutting to him to figure out what he's doing, or he's not doing anything that directly impacts the scene. And there's not a lot that you could like the dogfight should take up that scene. Maybe the key there is like you you make like the dogfight like a scene, and then like you have the other characters do something else in like another scene, or like I don't know, I don't know. It's that's I think a tough thing to juggle. Although I do think I don't think you necessarily need to do a whole X-wing squadron, but like if you had like 2 people in X-wings and like 3 people on the main ship, then like the secondary people have to be making at least like semi-interesting choices about like what they're doing, if that makes sense. Like, you know, only one person can be on scanners and be repairing the, the thing. But it's also kind of like it's hard to like get those things to, other than like, I do the same thing and I make the same roll, which is the big Starfinder problem.
Right.
Yeah, I also think that this stuff is really man, I did not fix my lag problem, huh? Well, whatever. I also think that that stuff is not impactful, right? Like it just feels so bad to spend a whole turn rolling a skill check to give somebody like a +2 bonus. You know what I mean? Like I want to give somebody +2d6 on their damage by diverting power, not +2, right?
Right.
And then part of it comes down to that, right? If there was just so much more value in being the comms guy, in so much more value in being the, you know, I don't know, whatever any other role is, as there is for pilot and gunner, I think maybe it would be a little more like equivalent. Even if, I mean, it would be insane to be giving people 2d6 on their damage, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That, or like maybe making like secondary weapons more like, if you like pull down like the requirements, right? Like if you can just have like anybody jump into like the tertiary turret, right, and like blast things, and it's not the end of the world. I don't know. I feel like doing like Starship Combat could be like a whole episode on its own about like making that compelling in a general sense.
Yeah.
Um. How did you guys feel about the Star Warsiness of the game? Right. Like I think there was some like we had our diversion. We spent like 30 minutes yesterday talking about the fate of Captain Panaka, and we had a previous session where we discussed like the canonicity of Sprite. But like I think we had like good kind of like Star Wars tie-in moments, and sometimes it was a little distracting, but I think that's part of the fun. Um, how do you think we did in terms of like making it feel like Star Wars? Because I think part of the trap you can fall into here is like you go into like the deep Star Wars lore, but like it doesn't feel right unless you're like evoking something from like a property, right? Like that's an Ithorian, and I remember what Ithorians are from because I remember that scene from A New Hope, or like this kind of this uh segment evoke something from like one of the movies or something. I think that's like key to making it feel right. Making it feel like approximately right. Like I think Cloud City did a good job of this. What did you guys think?
I feel that way too. I liked the attack in the woods. This was like Wall Ribbers. He was like hunting down like some Wookiee person. That session, like that felt very Star Wars to me. I mean, I guess there's a lot of Star Wars that felt specifically like the prequels to me, whereas I would say some of the stuff that we did in Cloud City felt more like the original trilogy. I don't really think anything felt like the sequel trilogy, but maybe that's just because the sequel trilogy isn't like doesn't have that same sort of like iconic construction in
Yeah.
that sense.
I
In
mean,
fact, now that I think about it, I feel like a lot of the sessions I ran were very prequel themed because they were very
Oh,
like war themed, if that makes sense, right?
surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise.
I think in a lot of ways that depends on what your primary influence was. So, Buddy, you were primarily influenced by the prequel trilogy and lore of the prequel trilogy, which inspired a lot of your content.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
definitely true.
for me, half my stuff was, or all my stuff was from the modules, and the modules were written with the expectation that it was run during the original trilogy. So there was inevitably a good bit of original trilogy homages kind of baked in that I tried to supplement where reasonable. Um,
Yeah.
for instance,
Go
Cloud City's right out of episode 5
Yeah,
and 6.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I
and
guess not
6.
6. No, it's not really 6. That's my bad. 6.
It's funny. A long time ago, we talked about a potential Star Wars game, which generated a huge argument between you and I about sort of like I almost want to say like the ethics of like setting a game inside of like a well-established
Event.
like universe, right? Where the specific contention was, wouldn't it? I thought it would be very cool if players were running the events of the like running parallel to the events of like the movies or whatever, lockstep, and then something radically different happens, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden we have done a huge divergence from canon. That was very cool to me. You thought that was blasphemous. We kind of sidestepped this by sort of setting it in the universe, but like, far enough away from all of that stuff that we never really had to like deal with it or interact with it that much. I don't know. Is there anything about that argument that you want to like revisit?
No, I mean, I still think I'm right. But it's also like,
I would say that I would agree with Mango on this, which is one reason why the only canonical character that I used was Lobot, and Lando Calrissian was actually supposed to play a part in
Oh
that
wow.
module, and I was like, yeah, hell no, I'm not putting him in the same room as you fuckers because you're gonna try and kill him or something.
screw up the
I mean,
timeline.
technically, it wouldn't matter, right? Because like this all takes place after the
Yeah,
after the original trilogy,
yeah.
so like that wouldn't be as big of a deal compared to we watched Darth Vader like marching Han Solo to the carbonite chamber and interrupt it or something, right?
Mm.
Uh, yeah, no, we would have. But if we had killed him, he wouldn't have been able to meet
Oh my god.
that woman in episode 9.
Oh my god.
Wouldn't have been able to like wink suggestively at his daughter, maybe.
Yikes. Is what I have to say about that.
Star Wars.
I kind of forgot how much I hated Rise of Skywalker, but it's always nice to revisit that. I guess in some certain. Yeah, well, I do think that. I mean, I understand that you think that. I understand that you think that you're right, obviously, and and like I said, we sort of like sidestepped the issue. But I definitely think that it would be fun, sort of doing that, like you know playing out the alternate history of, in other words, like a fictional universe, in the same way that like alternate history is interesting from like the alternate history of Watchmen, right, is like narratively compelling or something kind of along those lines.
So
Uh,
I would also say that I'm not sure we could necessarily do justice to the true major lore characters, and there's a measure of narrative dissonance created when the character is not acting perfectly with what each individual person's take of what the character should be doing. Um,
Yeah,
no,
I
that
think that's true.
I think I
And
agree
I
with
think the
you.
answer would be to fall away from that kind of thing. Like, I think it would be interesting to play in a world where, I think this is the example that I brought up, where the Yavin 4 assault on the Death Star fails. The Death Star blows up the rebel base, and you are now like, and like that is the divergence point. But it's not like you're on Yavin and hanging out with Luke Skywalker, but like you are now living in a universe where Luke Skywalker is dead and the Death Star is still around, and what do you do from there, right? Like that seems like a compelling situation, which is more about the dynamics of the world, I guess, than it is about like the the characters themselves.
Yeah, that
mm,
or hire Mark Hamill to play Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, get on Cameo. Is that the app where you can like hire people?
Yeah, well, yeah, but cameos like pre-recorded things. Just yeah, nah, but yeah. Um, I just wanted to shout out to chat Arc, or friend of the chat of the cast, Fail, talking about his character Arc, how Arc would, I guess, seduce Lando Calrissian. The implication is there, which is very on brand.
A plus.
Um, but what else? So I
Is there anything about your characters that you didn't get to do that you wanted to do?
um, there are
I
a lot
guess
of
I
parts
guess Argus got really powerful and will never be able to realize that power.
right, like because I was GMing for almost the entire time after I got my Mandalorian armor. There's only like one or two sessions after I hit like peak Mandalorian where um I wasn't able to really just show off and kill a whole bunch of guys by myself.
Yeah, I mean, you never like got to like use the jetpack and do super cool jetpack shit.
I'm not sure I ever quite got to the jetpack. I probably would
Yeah.
have bought that after finishing my session. So if we ever do go back to it, Argus will have the jetpack, but never really showed that in any of the game sessions.
Yeah, no, I got lucky in that, like, I got the opportunity to shoot my big gun, but like I like Jad never got to like act in any of like what I thought were the more interesting parts of his character, which is like the kind of like weird gun nationalism type stuff. It's just like that was probably a bad character motivation fit for the campaign. But you know,
Yeah, I mean, I had a great time. I like the interaction that I ended up having with Eliza might be like the highlight of Star Wars, where like you
Hmm.
know where Omega had to explain to a Jedi that like he was not a stormtrooper larping as an arc trooper basically for in her eyes, right? And that also happened in another session where like Omega's background had to, like factored into things with the separatists of whatever that heist one was called. I'm trying to think of the name of that mission. It came up both times there.
yeah, no, I think the ARC Troopers got like a pretty good kind of like hook into like things that are happening, like because that's like such like an integrated part of the lore, right? Like it's like the closest you can get to being um like a member of like the cast, right? Like like playing Luke Skywalker, or whatever, is playing like a stormtrooper or an ARC Trooper or like something like like I feel like if any of us had played like a member of the Rebel Alliance, right? Like a member of the Rebel Forces, that could have worked too. But like, or like I think Kento had some pretty cool stuff in there too. But Charles ended up having to drop the game for
Yeah, I mean,
reasons.
I do regret in a way sort of the construction of aspects of the game, story wise. Like, I think obligation is a neat system, and I honestly would like to use it in other places, right? Like we've talked about continuing forward with different games or whatever in this time slot, and I could see a world where it's like, okay, we're also just going to kind of port over obligation because I think it's neat. But one thing that sucks about obligation is how personalized it is, which can sort of lead to you know, if everybody gets to do an obligation mission for themselves, right? They are like that excludes the four other people, and if you had to do one for each person, that'd be like 5 missions, which is like a month and a half of D&D, which I think is a little bit rough. I think in general, I sort of like the version of this that we used to do, which was the ties that bind, which were connections between our characters internally to the party, right? So
That was a
Atticus and
Marcom brew.
Kolbjorn. Yeah, so Atticus and Kolbjorn Voss are brothers, and they're sort of like connected in that way. And now all of a sudden, instead of having 5 different axes for obligation, you have two, two and a half, or whatever that kind of like looks like. Because I like the idea of this thing that just kind of like pops up and is something that interacts with the party and throws a wrench into the narrative. But I feel like I would want it to be, or maybe actually I think a better example of this might be Big Red, which was a good example of obligation because everyone was invested in Big Red in a certain sense, even if
Yeah, because
yeah
he came up through the story and he just tied into something, right? Like I think this is maybe one of the weaknesses of obligation, because I think you're right, is that like it kind of, I don't know, at least from my perspective, I wasn't thinking about those individual things unless the role brought it up, right?
mhm.
Like I feel like if I had been thinking constantly about like how can I tie this in, it might have worked better, right? Like because like the next credit, the tie-in to the Ashen Legion being like the the force behind one of the bidders that came up when I rolled obligation on it, when Chad rolled obligation about it, like that being a thing that wasn't necessarily on a roll, like a thing that like you had always anticipated happening, which you can't do really with the obligation system quite right, like unless you roll the obligation behind a thing and be like, oh, I guess it was Jad this time, right, like that kind of thing, which I think kind of like, I think you want to mix like kind of like those bespoke kind of like this is the way, a thing that should, a hook that works versus kind of like a forcing on the fly to make it work. I think they're both valuable, but I think you want to like bake in a little bit more of the like this is a thing that's going to happen part of it on your
So,
own.
in some respects, um, Zekrafol was going to be a key player in that regardless. And honestly, the mechanic that was built into the session was if you flub with a lot of threats or despairs on a number of your rolls as you're trying to go stealthy, she gets hits on you guys. And when you hit a counter, then she finds you guys. That was the mechanic that was kind of built into the campaign. However, when I rolled your obligation, I just said, "Oh, hey, screw that mechanic. It just auto triggers on you because, oh, hey, she's technically Imperial. Well, Ashen Legion is supposed to have come from the Empire at some point in time. Therefore, she's not an Imperial. She's Ashen Legion, and therefore, I was able to kind of force the issue to make the obligation work. And in a lot of ways, that's where the obligations tend to be best, was where you could kind of force the issue. There was another time that ultimately we didn't get to the bottom of the story narrative, but for Omega, um, you triggered during my first campaign arc, where it triggered while you were on the abandoned planet, and kicks. I was like, "Oh, hey, he's your person, and you triggered here, and there's supposed to be Imperials coming in to attack while you're trying to rescue there. So let's just stick kicks in the mix and have that sort of seed where you see the Death Trooper and you just run the fuck away
Yeah,
because you
that
realize
was
how
another
scary it
really
was."
great moment. But the thing is that because it was like randomized, like so Fairland in the chat says honestly obligation should be earned in game and not made beforehand. In a certain sense I agree with this. Because it creates a more party centered, like even if obligation is directed towards an individual person. We all had a stake in Big Red, like I said. But I also think that there is something to be said for the randomization aspect of obligation not quite working out. Because I feel like when I was running Hell's Rebels, there was a frame of obligation in that system because everyone had a different window into sort of like the rebellion, right? So in that Charles's character was playing an elf and his elf mentor comes to holy shit, what was the name of the town that you guys were in for the entirety of that whole campaign?
Kintargo?
Kintargo, right? His elf mentor comes to Kintargo. They're doing stuff, right? Obviously Beauregard was intimately involved with one of these houses and was, like doing that kind of stuff. Um, there was all of this interaction with Rahadum, which is where Enoch's character was coming. He was a laying-in from Rahadum, and you guys were negotiating with Rahadum as kind of this big, extra national force that was going to back you up in your fight against Cheliax or whatever. And because that had been determined beforehand, but like as the GM, I got to sculpt the narrative around those plot points themselves. It was able to like weave more naturally into the game rather than like, well, we roll the dice at the beginning of the session and now on the fly. Okay, here you go. You gotta do obligation, right? Um
Yeah,
so maybe I like obligation in that frame more than in the way that Star Wars systemizes it.
yeah.
At
I
the
think
same time, this is also a consequence of us having such an open setting for our campaign, where it was very much a pick a mission, and based on which mission you pick, you have different factions involved. So if you rolled an obligation that did not involve these factions, then, well, sucks to suck. You're
Yeah.
not going to be able to
Yeah,
shoehorn this in.
that is insanely true. Because this campaign, in a certain sense, in Western RPG sense, this campaign was built like a Fallout, whereas Hell's Rebels was built more like a Mass Effect, right? The choices in Hell's Rebels were big choices that had monumental consequences that happened at set points in the narrative, right? Choosing to ally with Barzillai Thrune at the end of the third book rather than fight against him, like that was a huge plot point that determined the entire rest of the game, which feels more like how storytelling in Mass Effect was happening, where like you're making decisions about a singular track that can sometimes diverge from what would otherwise be expected. Whereas Fallout 4, like you're doing these parallel tracks, these parallel quest lines. You can be progressing the railroad and the Minutemen and the Enclave all in lockstep with one another until you have to make whatever kind of choice between them. And so maybe like obligation as we ran it was the best that we could do for an open-ended Star Wars game where the point was that there wasn't really that kind of like strong narrative through line connecting all of the sessions.
yeah, because like if somebody's not involved, what you have is like you have to like have someone radio in, right? That's what happened with Argus's obligation in the Cotelier storyline, right? It's like somebody from the Golden Armada had to radio in and tell him to do something because the Golden Armada wasn't otherwise involved, right? Like they had to have
Hmm.
an extrinsic kind of motivation. Whereas if you're running a a plotted campaign, right? Like hopefully those connections make themselves more apparent. I think something we could have done that to make it a little bit better would have been like when we picked the mission to just roll obligation right there to give the GM some time to figure out how to work it in. Um, or like other things like so to Fail's point, right, about it should be earned and not made beforehand. I think part of that's a consequence of us having a lot of characters that kind of also cycled in and out, weren't necessarily the most consistent, which I think was kind of a mark against it. Like I think Fail's right. That should all like if you have that many and that kind of like inconsistent characters, earning it in game makes a little bit more sense, I think. Because you can kind of build it up and you make sure it's something that the party all has to work with. Whereas like a smaller party, I feel like even if you had disparate individual things, like they quickly become part of the party story. Um, right, like us pulling obligation for Black Suns would have made a lot of sense, but like you said, Big Red worked because even though that was primarily an Argus thing, when it wasn't directly actually tied to his obligation, it was just kind of like tied to who Argus was as a character. Um, and and two, it was something that like came from in game rather than being something bolted on from the exterior story. But I think it could have worked if like that was like a if dealing with the Golden Armada was a thing that we constantly had to do as like a four-man party, say, because of Argus's past.
Yeah.
Type of
Do
deal.
you think like looking forward into like let's assume we're all continuing the Sunday like slot. What would you like to like play next? Like what is on your mind for like this group of players?
Hmm.
Like would you want to go back to something more with a more solid narrative spine? Would you want to continue with the like the very open-ended sort of style?
I think it depends. I think this group was good for like vaguely hijinks, right? Like this story wasn't like super hijinks, but it was also like not super serious, right? And I think that that meshes well with this group of people, especially kind of like we're playing online and we're not playing with webcams, and so there's like a little bit of tendency to kind of go into like maybe people aren't paying the most attention. I think like light hijinks is the right kind of mold for that.
Yeah.
Um, so like I don't know what captures that the what kind of system captures like hijinks the best. Like I'm thinking of a couple different things that and you also want I think you also want something that's like a little bit what do I think? Do I think this, I think actually online games are better served by like a solid battle map, right? Like I think the more narrative games work better when you're all sitting around a table and you're looking at each other and you get like good kind of like facial interactions and you can like not necessarily talk over each other, but like talk kind of like as a group. It's harder to do that on voice chat because of just the mechanics of like voice over IP, essentially. Um, so like I think that we could like there'd be some really great fun games that like if we all like rent a cabin in the woods, all go out there for a week and play some cool stuff. I think there's some good games this group could play, but I think I'd want something a little bit more mechanically focused. Um, story wise, I think it could go either way. What are your thoughts, Nick?
For some reason, I had an epiphany of a game that I think would fit this slot, this group, this setting really well. And for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of it, but I have it in my head. So now I'm trying to look it up and find it
Have we
again.
played it before? Like, do we play it at Gen Con?
I can't remember. I have not. That doesn't mean you guys have not.
Fair enough.
What's the thing that makes it fit so well? Like what's you have like the concept in your head?
Ah, shit. It's like uh, it's something you probably would actually know it. So it's like a mixture of like Western and fantasy. So it's got a bit of tech, a bit of other stuff. It is pretty adaptable to a lot of um, flavor on the fly, where you can kind of make all sorts of bullshit. And I'm doing a terrible job of describing this. So come back to me in just a second. I'll see
Okay.
if I can remember the name of it.
What are your thoughts then, buddy?
I think personally, I'd want to do something more narrative. Um, just on my like, I think that's something that interests me on a GM level. Actually, that's not true. I think really if I really wanted to do this, I would actually want to buckle down and make that exploration campaign we talked about. But that's like an impossibility. Come on, I'm never doing that. But I could definitely see I sort of miss that after a year of Star Wars. I like the idea of having, very very like clear, straightforward kind of objectives, and like when a session starts, we can say, okay, last time you guys got the Gem of Osiris and you loaded it into the barge. This time you have to get the barge from this town to the next town downriver, and you know that you know there's a goblin warband on your tail that's going to be trying to like harangue you, right? It's so much easier to just like go in those sorts of situations. um that I do sort of miss that, and I think that would be what I would want to do.
That's fair.
Though probably not, by the way. I think I want to not do D&D or Pathfinder. One thing that I really loved was not doing those systems. I mean, that probably affects you guys more. This is like my only game. That's not true. I do have a D&D game, but you guys play a lot more D&D and Pathfinder because you have the other games than I do. So, would you want to switch? Like, how interested are you in doing systems that are not D&D and Pathfinder?
I think I'm very so. I play in uh, uh, uh three or four different Pathfinder games. No, I play 3 Pathfinder games and 1 D&D 5e game. So something different be great. This is my only non D&D game that I'm playing, or non D&D type game that I'm playing, consistently. Um, you know, we weren't playing consistently for a while. Now it's over, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did pitch that Warhammer game. Warhammer might be what I would vote for, but that's a soft vote in the sense that it's just kind of the only idea I have. For the viewers at home, the idea behind this Warhammer campaign is I thought it would be um, neat, I guess I would say, to run a version of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that is sort of set in the same world idea of Total War Warhammer, because one of the things that makes Total War Warhammer neat is that like there are factions like all over the place, and they just announced, like for instance, they just released a new update with a dark elf who starts just northwest of the Empire. There's a lizard man that starts just northwest of the Empire, right? In a Total War Warhammer game, you see so much movement on the map because it's a grand strategy game that it's like it would not be crazy for vampires to march on Altdorf, or for Norska to march on Altdorf, or for any of these other, sort of disparate factions to be, kind of battening down, or barreling down on kind of the Empire. Whereas Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay lives in a world where you just kind of assume the Empire is the Empire in its own unique thing, and it's not really like threatened from the outside. But that's a very half-cooked idea. Phil in the chat mentions that he would love a 5e session, which, you know what, fair enough. I honestly also maybe could be convinced to do 5e, just on the basis of not having played a lot of it. But I really enjoyed like getting out of the like breaking out of the mold and playing a different system. So I feel like my default would be to try something else that was sort of like Star Wars, and that it's not in that, I don't know, clear mold. Oh, Phil singing my song. Let's go back to fourth edition.
Oh God, I'm quite okay with not going back to fourth edition.
Oh, I miss you every day, fourth edition.
The fourth edition
Actually,
is what kind of drove me to Pathfinder.
I mean, it's funny. I do agree with that. I think that fourth edition is worse than Pathfinder and has a lot of problems, obviously. But it's funny how much I still use fourth edition in my like in my like fourth edition is so foundational to my understanding of the game, right? Like it codified those enemy types, right? Like I think about that all the time, having a brute, a soldier, right? The whatever the ranged guys were called,
So
artillery. I feel like that was one of the most important things that I learned as a GM, was like creating monster groups with those sorts of archetypes.
I would definitely say the monsters I remember you running before you got super deep in 4E versus the monsters you were running after fourth edition. Um, Combat probably improved a bit. When we were trying to co-GM and you were coming up with some of the monsters for that was very much just throw numbers at the wall and see hope it is balanced.
Yeah,
Um,
I think well, the Pathfinder bestiary is okay because it does some of the stuff. One of the things that was so great about the fourth edition bestiary was just like having a very clear sheet of like powers, right? Which are essentially like boss mechanics almost, right? Like in a Warcraft sense.
right.
Like that was so useful compared to 3.5, where like at the time I felt really like lost as a GM. It's like, okay, well, I guess it has bite, so it bites you over and over and over again, and that's it. It doesn't do anything more complex than that, which is not really like a ding on 3.5, just because of like
No,
where it
three
was at
five
the
definitely had
time.
the tools. I think it was more where we were in our maturity.
Yeah, and I also think 3.5 was built better to describe a world using game terms than it was to create a game. You know what I mean? Like the enemy archetypes that are in fourth edition are very clearly like, this is about creating interesting gameplay for your players. Whereas or 3.5 is like, the Ankeg is a naturally occurring creature that has this behavior, and it could pop up in your game. Which I
That
think
was
are a
true
little bit,
in most
you know,
editions.
yeah. Play some Deadland. Was it called Deadlands? A supernatural western is fails
Deadlands
asking in the
Deadlands is
chat.
a Savage Worlds thing. Although there's a classic. I
So
actually was big on Deadlands.
Deadlands was actually its own thing, but it is available in a Savage Worlds version called Deadlands Reloaded. And it was either Deadlands or Savage Worlds that I was thinking of when I was thinking of the thing.
Okay.
So that would be something that I would potentially be interested in. At the
Yeah,
same time, I probably wouldn't be the most comfortable with running it.
yeah,
So
Savage Worlds is weird because it's got like escalating like dice, like your dice get bigger. As you get better at things, like you roll like higher, like larger dice. Like you go from like a D4 to like a D6 to like a
That's
D8.
cool.
Yeah. Something that I've been thinking about. It's not Fate. But I was about to talk about a Fate thing, which is Spirit of the Century, which is this game that I've wanted, that I
You
haven't
have
beat it
talked about this a million times, yeah.
yeah. Um, which is it's like a steampunk like pulpy thing, but like the thing that got me hooked on it was a one of the powers in the game is, if you're like kind of like a deceptive type character, is like you essentially you exit the scene, and then at some point you just like one of the boss's minions, you say like, I'm actually that guy in disguise, and you just pop back in, and that was the type of like creativity that like just like sung to me as like kind of like being like a super cool thing to do. So there's so many systems out there. Like there's this, I think it's called City of Mists, which is basically you like make yourself into a superhero, but it's like modeled after like a concept. I have to go find it again, but like you model yourself after like a concept or like a value, but like the story I read about was like somebody built a character based on kind of like being based on kind of like the model of like Michael Jordan, rather than being like like an abstract value or something. So it's something like that I think would be
There are
like,
a bunch of superhero games out there. I really liked, one of the ones I like is the Marvel game, because the Marvel game doesn't actually have skill checks, which I think is really neat. It just has it has resources. Like if you want to do a thing, you have to expend resources to do it, right? Like Spider-Man can never fail at web slinging, but if Spider-Man wants to web sling, he will have to burn resources in order to accomplish that, which I always thought was a really neat, like a really neat system.
yeah, that is cool, because it's like that's an interesting idea, because you never don't do the cool thing, you just lose like kind of like the stock to do it, if that makes sense. You don't try and do a cool thing and fail at it, which I think makes a lot of sense for a superhero thing. Yeah, that is cool. Very cool. There's a system that I remember that had like intentional failing forward in it, that I like you could choose to fail a check to get like a thing. There's a couple different versions of this. The ones that I thought were really good were like, you pre-register like what your character's kind of like sins are, like their like character flaws are, and when you play into them, you get a reward from it, like like you like, or like this might be a 7C's thing, where like the GM can be like, the uh your flaw is calling to you to act in a certain way, and you can do it, and I will give you this reward, but you can also deny it, and like if you think it's going to be too bad, right? Like, the
Yeah.
thing is a cool way to do it. But There's so much. There's so many systems. We just play Everyone is John for like 12 weeks straight. That would be a thing. But I think we're over on standard time. Let's talk about our weeks a bit. Nick, you've had the longest week since you were last on the show. How's your personal your non-topic stuff been?
Things have been fine. I've at various points played more or less video games. I think the last time I was on, I was talking about playing through the Baldur's Gate series. I forget how far I was at the time. I ended up getting to near the end of the Shadows of Vom campaign, and then I dropped it for a bit, or for quite a while, and then I've kind of come back to it more recently again to try and push a little bit forward the end game. Kind of currently stuck on the Lich Kangax, who's one of the toughest bosses in optional bosses in the Shadows of Vom campaign. Otherwise, I've gone in hard on the Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel series, which is combination JRPG and honestly VN, because it's just got so much fucking text and story to it that it's half like virtual novel at times. Otherwise, I pick at FF14 here and there, but I'm not really going that hard on that. So those are some of the main things I've been playing in my downtime.
Very cool. Did you watch the Snyder Cut?
Yeah, I believe I was commenting on your cast for that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, and you were also in the chat for King Kong versus Godzilla or Godzilla versus Kong.
Yep, definitely commenting on both of those from the chat.
Yeah, I mean, this is the nice thing about HBO Max, right? Is that it's doing all these big releases because Mortal Kombat is coming out. I think it's the next one. Yeah, it's the next one. It's the next big one that comes out on HBO Max. So I don't remember where it's going to, or when it's going to come out. It might be May.
Is it really that soon? Like
it's this year sometime, right? Like
I don't know. It's like the Mortal Kombat movie was like, as far as I thought it was like announced like a couple of weeks ago, like, or at least the trailer dropped for it.
Wait, this can't be right. This is saying this Friday.
Wait, really?
No way. Are you kidding me?
Guess we're gonna have to push the Outriders
episode
out.
Holy shit! It is this Friday.
Oh, wait.
I'm so excited.
Wait, US April 23rd. That might be the international date. It might be another week.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah, because there's also the Suicide Squad. I know that's in August. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like it's April 23rd when it goes into HBO Max. So not next episode, but the cast after.
Very, very exciting news.
Oh man. But the original cinematic Mortal Kombats are movies that I have watched more time. The only movie that I've watched more than the original Mortal Kombat is like Star Wars, like the original trilogy. Everything like we made a drinking game out of Mortal Kombat in college, and it is such a stupid movie, but it's so much fun to watch.
It is pretty fun to watch. I think I agree. Is it your favorite comic book or video game movie?
I mean, maybe just I do have a soft spot in my heart for the Super Mario Brothers movie, but
yeah, I think mine is probably Warcraft, but
yeah,
that's not a hard throne to that's not a hard movie to dethrone. I'm just trying to think. Like, it's like Detective Pikachu. Like, I think Detective Pikachu is better than Warcraft, but I enjoy it less.
Yeah, that's fair. Sonic was great. I might.
Sonic, yeah, but like Sonic was great. Like, that's like saying The Room is my favorite movie.
Yeah.
You know?
No, this is the same thing with Mortal Kombat, right?
Yeah, that's true. I guess for sure.
And like Sonic, like I like genuinely enjoyed in parts, right? Like what's it like? Jim Carrey was like great in Sonic. Like I would go back and watch Sonic, like just to relive it. Whereas like Mortal Kombat was always like, this is so dumb, it's gonna be great. Annihilation. My favorite part about the second Mortal Kombat Annihilation was Jack's figures predominantly, and like what's her name? What's Sonya? Sonya, like like it's like, and they killed Johnny Cage, and Jack's like, who the fuck is Johnny Cage? Like, because he wasn't in the first movie. It's just like it just so perfect, but it's just such a worse movie than the first one, and the first one's not great. So I'm interested to see what this new one's like, even though there's gonna be no Johnny Cage in it, which will make me cry. And there's like some new original character.
Yeah, it has my boy Hiroyuki Sanada, who is a Japanese actor who kind of crossed over, but he's in Westworld, which was amazing and great, and he's in a couple of other things that I can't remember, but he's Scorpion in that movie. And I remember seeing him, and I was like, oh, my boy. So I am big excited for Mortal Kombat for sure.
Oh, me too. Just because Mortal Kombat's a movie. Like I said, I've got that history with it. There's like all sorts of weird sequels on the horizon. Like, didn't they say there's gonna be like a Face Off sequel or something? Which is like, Face Off's great, but like, I don't know how you give that a sequel, like, in a way that's like meaningful.
Yeah, it might just be a remake. I feel like a lot of those are just sort of like remakes of like weird stuff from the 90s that people are into.
I don't know how you remake. Like, part of what makes Face Off so good is it's John Travolta, and John Travolta pretending to be Nick Cage. And Nick
Yeah, like
Cage
who is the modern John Travolta that I would put in that role?
I think the bigger thing is like
No,
who's
just bring him
Nick
back.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you need Nick Cage and you need John Travolta to pretending to be Nick Cage, and I don't think you can replace John Travolta. I think he's probably a little bit easier to replace. You just have someone like pretending to be Nick Cage, but like, I don't think you can have someone do it like and not be like super cheesy about it. And there's no one that's Nick Cage enough to be besides Nick Cage.
Yeah, I mean Nick Cage is pretty unique. I'm just trying to think of like who are people that have like done like Oscar winning performances and that are also like absolutely insane. Like who's won best Oscar or best actor at the Oscars for the past like 10 years? Because like is there anybody among those number that are just like funky enough that we could call them, you know, uh like the modern, I don't know, like the modern version of Nick Cage, or could pull off like that? All these guys are too serious. Like I'm looking at like Joaquin Phoenix, right? Like Gary Oldman,
I think Joaquin Phoenix might be able to do it.
Eddie Redmayne, Casey Affleck,
Oh,
Matthew
Eddie Redmayne
McConaughey.
could definitely fucking do it. Have you seen
Oh, that's
Jupiter
actually
Ascending?
that's fair. Eddie Redmayne could maybe get it across for sure. Oh my God, The Artist! I forgot about this. Do you remember The Artist?
No.
It was the silent film. It really sucked. It was the silent film that like won all the Oscars in 2011, 2012, 2011. Maybe Bradley Cooper, looking at it, Bradley Cooper would be a pretty good option for like the John Travolta. He sort of is like he sort of has the same career path as John Travolta, I feel like.
Yeah, I could buy that. Before we get too far down like weird theoretical castings for uh you know what is it, Face Off remakes, how was your week, buddy?
Oh boy, what did I do this week? Besides of just a million mythics. I played Outriders, which we're obviously talking about next week. Though I will say, just on a high level, Outriders is very good, and it really has captured my attention. Though it has interestingly, and maybe this is just like the juxtaposition of this game versus
Anthem.
like so this game actually versus WoW,
Oh,
because they are sort of attempting to be in the same space in a way, which has made me realize to actually talk about this, I want to explain something a little bit different. Okay, so something I do for my job sometimes is I will play games that are different than that are like in established genres or whatever, but that aren't out yet. And a lot of times what people want to do is they want to do a fusion, right? So they want to do, I want to do you know well, whatever the case may be, this one was a MOBA and a third-person shooter, right? So it was you are in a third-person shooter, but there's like minions running down a lane. There's lanes, there's a jungle, and everything like that. And something that was interesting about this was that game had MOBA-like abilities that in a MOBA work great, but in a third-person shooter work terribly, right? So, for instance, I played a character who had a kind of a like a long range global snipe ability. So think like Jinx Rocket, Ezreal's ultimate, something kind of like Ash's ultimate, and something kind of along those lines, right? Like it creates a projectile and shoots across the entire map. These are great for a MOBA, right? But they're terrible for a third-person shooter, and here's why. In a third-person shooter, you're looking over the shoulder of your character, whereas on a MOBA, you're isometric. So when you're isometric, you're looking at a plane, right? The camera is perpendicular to the plane, and when you're drawing a skill shot, you are essentially drawing on a plane, and it's very easy to see and very easy to sort of like telegraph that stuff, right? So when I'm aiming an Ezreal ultimate, because I'm looking perpendicular onto the plane, it's easy for me to sort of aim because of my ability to sort of see how that skill shot looks, right? When I was in the third person shooter, because the camera is mostly behind my shoulder, right? When I'm looking down the sights aiming this ability, I'm going parallel to the plane, right? Like the plane is under me. And I can see like another person's like nameplate through the fog. So I know that I'm vaguely aiming towards them, but like I don't have the same ability to like aim and the same satisfaction of like nailing an Ezreal ult because of the way that camera is oriented. And I think Outriders has a very similar problem. One of the things that Outriders does is it places on the world like indicators that like mechanics are going to go off, right? There is going to be fire in this ring and you have to like look down. But because that is on the ground and the camera is in the third person, it's actually kind of difficult to see like the stuff that is under you compared to something like WoW where you can zoom the camera out by a lot and you can really look it down at the floor and you can see like not just that so there's something under you, right? But you can see like there are a variety of different sorts of things that the camera can place under you. Really, I mean, I'm saying WoW, but like any MMO, right? um and so like in WoW you have swirlies, right? You have circles that you need to soak. You can do a lot of interesting stuff with this because of the way that you can view the mechanics on the map, which is something that I do think is frustrating about Outsiders and I think holds the genre back and makes me wonder about how like Destiny can do it because it's first fucking person, which is like the worst that you could possibly do, right? Because you just cannot see your feet at all. And like, does Destiny have mechanics like that where you have to like dodge things? Like there is something on the ground, you have to dodge it. I feel like the answer is not really, right?
Not in particular. Like dodging, it's like a weird thing too because like there's like no rolling in Destiny, right? Like um my like everything you have to do is like very clearly telegraphed. Um Also like I feel like a lot of those things like float in the air, right? Like they're like at eye level rather than being like on the ground for the most part. Or
Oh,
like
so
they've
it'll
got
be
like a
like an orb at eye level, yeah.
that or like, it'll have like a spire in the middle to indicate like, like where like it's very hard to like it'd be very hard to like I don't think there's anything that's just on the ground, right? Like, I think
Sure.
there's maybe I'm forgetting something, but my recollection is like there's always some indicator that's like in the view space that'd be hard to miss. Also a lot of it's just kind of like things coming directly at you rather than being like ground things, ground hazards.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like Destiny is built more like Doom, where most of what you're doing is like dodging incoming projectiles, which makes sense,
Yeah.
obviously, because a
First
uh
person shooter.
it's a first person shooter, and so is Doom,
Yeah.
right? Like Doom sort of works because the weapons are all hit scan, but the enemy weapons are projectiles that you can that you can juke, which I think is like honestly probably pretty good game design. Though the Anthem comparison is not far off. I obviously really love Anthem and I miss Anthem every day. And even though I didn't even really play it when it was out, uh, um, And it does some things better than Anthem, a lot better than Anthem, and it does some things that I think are a little bit worse than Anthem, which make me a little sad. But we can talk about that more next week. That's just a
Yeah.
preview.
Yeah, I've also been playing Outriders. Have not been playing so much myself, but that'll be a thing to talk about next week. What else? I don't know if I've been doing anything interesting otherwise. Have I watched any interesting YouTube essays? Because that's what's taking up. That's what takes up a lot of my time these days, right? Like,
Yeah, that's true. I feel that for sure.
There was I don't know if I watched anything particularly good. I watch a lot of cooking videos on YouTube. I really like cooking videos.
Is this gonna be a cooking? Is this gonna be a cooking stream?
No, no.
Are
Oh,
you
you
gonna
know
are you
what?
gonna make are you gonna make
Oh,
some
that would have been last week's.
gabagool?
That would have been last week's episode. We didn't do an April Fool's episode this year because the Monday
You're
didn't fall right.
right. I wasn't thinking about it because we did pizzas last time.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, we need to make an episode about gabagool and capicola.
yeah. I mean,
Because
if I ever get around to watching fucking Sopranos, then that'll be
do you say gabagool or do you say capicola?
I say gabagool. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I think that might be my dad lived in Italy, and so he says capicola. He says
Right.
we're gonna have some capicola.
Yeah, this is like a a very how do I like this is a very Italian American thing, right? Like I find this to be endlessly fascinating personally, right? Like the kind of like that accent, that Italian American accent was a thing that was like a peasant accent over in Italy that came over with the wave of Italian American immigrants. Um but basically got like educated out of the system in Italy, right? People don't speak like that in Italy anymore because like it was like it's kind of like a bumpkin accent that doesn't exist anymore. But
Yeah, sure.
no one taught formal Italian to the Italian American immigrants, right? So like it survives mostly in like North Jersey and in like the Boston area. And there's like rules that you can figure out, right? Like the C to G, right? Like calamari is like galamad, like you drop off the last syllable, and like I think they're like if your dad says capicole, right? Like that's like most of it, or that's part of it, but it's not like the whole thing. Um, but I don't know. And it's something that is super interesting. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff
Yeah.
that stuff too, right? Like
I mean, there's have you ever seen the Italian spelling bee, which it has a guy from The Sopranos in it. It's like an SNL thing. Maybe it's like a college humor thing. But like the spelling bee, it's like spell mozzarella, and then one person gets up there and she goes like Mozzarella, and then the other person does Mottsdel.
yeah, mozzarella, yeah.
It's that one that's right. I'm butchering this. I haven't
Yeah.
watched this in a while, but I
No, I know
remember
what you're talking
thinking that
about.
was
Yeah,
super
yeah.
funny, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just I don't know. It's it I don't know. It's so like there's like real culinary stuff there too, right? Like chicken parmigiana, right? Chicken parm is not like a traditional Italian dish. A traditional Italian dish is eggplant parm, but there was so much like abundance of meat in the New World that like or like, abundance of like
In the New World.
well, it's not the New World, right? Because
Columbus over here.
well, because it's not the New World, right? Because like I mean,
Sure.
tomatoes were New World, right? Like tomatoes had to make
Yeah.
its way back to make its way into Italian cooking, but like in that wave of Italian American immigrants in like the late 19th, early 20th century, um, meat was much more plentiful than it was in Europe, is my understanding of it, and that's where like we get like veal and chicken parm from. It's not a thing that's like nearly so much. Also, kind of like the like certain like sauces, right? Like I think it's bolognese isn't like like one it's like slightly different in America, but two like there's like it's a little bit more like regional in Italy, but like we have like the one version that like was solidified over here, or like I like Alfredo's a little bit more controversial, right? Because having cream or milk in your Alfredo isn't a thing that like that's not it's not
Yeah, that's
authentic.
something my dad told me is that Alfredo, or well, I don't think he was talking about Alfredo, but he was talking about cream sauces. That cream
Yeah,
sauces are an American thing; they're not an Italian thing.
yeah mostly it's like butter and cheese emulsified with some of the pasta water like that like true Alfredo is like is like a table sauce. It's like when you make like like you make the pasta and you throw it in the dish and then you put in a little bit of the pasta water and it's like just cheese and butter and you just like keep mixing it until it's emulsified. Um, the American version is also tasty. It's just different, right? Like it's a whole different thing. But anyway,
Yeah.
this is not a food podcast.
Slowly becoming some derps talk about food, wherein
Yeah.
I say that I ordered takeout 8 days a week.
Oof.
Uh,
Did I? I don't think I made anything interesting this week, so I can't even talk about like super cool things. I made smash burgers on Saturday, which I love, but are not like super culinarily.
what are smash burgers? What's the
S-
difference between a smash burger and anything else?
So like a smash burger is you take the patty or like you take the ground beef and you put it in a ball and you put it on your cooking surface and you smash it with the with like your burger flipper. And it like if you do it right, like you spread
Oh,
the edges,
and it's super flat.
super flat and super like it gets super caramelized on the edges if you do it quite right. I'm not super great at it, but like it's a thing like
I've
that.
definitely eaten those before.
Yeah,
Like at restaurants and stuff, but I don't think I ever knew them as smash burgers.
yeah. The polar opposite is like the steakhouse burger, which is like a thick, juicy burger. That's like more about like the like like having like you can get like you can't get a smash burger medium rare because the whole point is like you smash it down and you cook it for like 30 seconds. It's like too thin to have like a real center to it. Whereas
Do
like
you get steakhouse burgers medium rare?
I don't usually get steakhouse burgers, right? Like
Okay.
but I
Yeah, I
would, I
never
think.
get my burger. I like my steaks more rare, but I never get burgers rare because I'm like, what the fuck is rare ground beef? That's
Yeah,
not
no,
like.
there's more danger there because like the reason you can do like a rare steak is the center, like like the center is like hidden from the world, right? Like you just have to like sanitize the outside, whereas ground beef is all outside.
Yeah, yeah.
Nick, do you have any pressing food opinions? I
You're
guess
asking me about food.
fair point.
Um, I'm sitting here eating chicken nuggets and French fries.
Oh my god.
Um, honestly, I am also Italian. I do like Italian food, but not real Italian food, the Americanized Italian food, particularly because I really like chicken for the most part, chicken and fish.
Ha-
So,
I think of chicken tenders or chicken fingers the
I
other
mean,
day, or I guess those are the same or whatever, and it was like the most amazing thing I'd like ever eaten because I was like driving all day and I just like went into a drive-through at like a Jack in the Box and I got some chicken tenders and I was like, these chicken tenders are the best thing I've ever eaten.
yeah. Uh, but at the same time, this is really me saying that you guys get to go talk about food. I'll sit over here in my corner, realizing that I generally don't have a valid opinion when it comes to food.
Or well, hey,
Uh,
so this is I think an interesting question for the panel. What's your favorite chicken tender dipping sauce?
Oh, but
barbecue.
mine is barbecue sauce. I don't know if what's yours?
I'm a big fan of honey mustard. Like that's like my general go-to.
I'm not a honey mustard person per se. Nick, what is your favorite dipping sauce?
I said barbecue at the exact same time you said barbecue.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
okay. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. There is a place in LA called Top Tenders that makes like chicken tenders and they do chicken tenders and waffle fries and it's a good one. It's tasty. I don't know what else to
all
say.
right. I'm gonna out myself as the weirdo here. What do you guys like dipping your fries in?
Oh, obviously ketchup. Come on.
Yeah, I
You're gonna do
I don't dip my fries.
Okay.
fair enough.
I'm a big mayo guy. I like the mayo. I like the European way. I also like malt vinegar, but um
That would have gotten you bullied in my high school. I remember we used to bully the kids that did mayo for their fries.
I didn't even know it was enough. Like I didn't even really know it was a thing in high school. I don't understand. Like you had enough people doing it that you bullied them. Like you have like like a European
I remember
translated
one
population.
kid specifically who did it, who we bullied.
Was his
It
name
only
like
takes one to get bullied.
was his name like Hans? It's like oh yes,
No,
I
I
like
can't
the
actually
fries
remember his
from
name.
from the from
No, he was. I mean, he was. Yeah, he was just like one of us. When I say bullied, I sort of just
yeah.
mean like lightly teased. But yeah.
Um, but yeah. So I think we're at the end. Unless you guys wanted to talk about anything else, I think we're about at the end of our time. All right. Well, if you'd like to follow us on, or if you'd like to send us an email about the Star Wars FFG system or fries or anything else that we talked about in this podcast, you can email us at dersplaygames@gmail.com, podcast@dersplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/dersplaygames, where these go out live. Follow us on YouTube and on Patreon if you want, and review us on podcast services. Do all those good things. Nick, did you have anywhere that you want to direct people for you, or
No,
okay?
I don't. Don't follow me.
Right. Don't follow Nick anywhere. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to talk about before we get out of here?
Well, we happen to have a video game releasing this week. The Dark Side Detective: A Fumble in the Dark, which is the follow-up to the Dark Side Detective point-and-click adventure game, comes out on Thursday, on April 15th. So if you haven't wishlisted it, if you wanna be cool and play this cool game that I genuinely think is actually insanely funny, and if you are not sold by that incredibly lame pitch, then you might want to stop by the stream this week, which is me, Buddy Gets Good. I'm playing the Dark Side Detective: A Fumble in the Dark. I think the first 2 cases, and I think I'll be voice acting the characters again. The last time I did the Dark Side Detective, the chat bullied me into voice acting all of the characters, and I'm probably gonna have to continue that trend on Friday. So
You should record it and release it as DLC. Buddy cut.
So yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. With that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.